Really good to be here today. Um, and I think actually quite interesting there's been so much context relevance already, but Open Cities Lab over the last 10 years has gone from a project focus to a program focus to a product focus. And even though we're a nonprofit company, we see impact products and productization and product thinking as really critical to what we're doing. So as mentioned, we work throughout the continent, mainly on citizen empowerment, building government capacity, and trust and accountability in the civic space. And the way we do that is through a team of data scientists, designers, technologists, researchers that try to handle tech and data literacy and capacity building, civic tech, action research, ML, AI, whatever else, engagement and co-design. But I think what's interesting about this urban digital twin discussion is that it's got me thinking about slides from 10 years ago that I put up talking about civic technology and open data. So I did a similar thing, which is 10 years ago, I was doing a talk and I said, Google image search of a smart city. And then yesterday I did a Google image search of an urban digital twin. And the same thing happened, which is that there were all of these kind of cool ideas about sort of, what Elon might build on Mars, but something that doesn't look anything like the cities we live in or anything like, you won't see a human there. Well, you'll see me up in the corner, just looking, same thing, that sort of. And so again, brought up a slide from 10 years ago that I think kind of very fitting is that technology is not the same as equality. Knowledge is not the same as change. Smart doesn't necessarily mean people, and open doesn't necessarily mean democratic. So I don't have enough time. I'd love to do a whole kind of sales pitch of the projects we work on. Will you trust me that we do a lot of good work in digital tools, and we worked with over 20 cities directly and probably touched a lot more across the continents and run a thing called Africa Data Hub and et cetera, go look us up. But our experience with urban digital twins, so it's quite interesting hearing the business model there because we're not research first. That's why I'm here to partner with all of you. We work directly with cities to make sure a problem in the near term could get solved. And the other thing is that there was another thing that was different from the other one, but I can't remember it, so we'll move on. But our experience with urban digital twins is that we build similar modeling sometimes because we get involved along the data pipeline. So we get involved in collecting, storage, utilization, system-based infrastructure projects, analytical projects. So have done the sort of LiDAR, satellite modeling, have done the sort of things that happen, but very much, that was the other thing, is that we don't set our frame based on a research or funding application, but more around UI UX. So we start with UI UX in an urban space. And I think that really helps because it means that we can address problems that are kind of come up and we can pivot and be agile. So it's quite interesting on that business model earlier. So obviously there's great promise for urban digital twins and I work with them. So I work, as I say, sometimes intersecting and supporting them, sometimes building a part of them, more just assessing them from our own research, and this is my own research. I'm sorry, it's not going to be very academic. I am a data scientist by background, but don't really care much about the research sector that way anymore, more about impact. But I do think it's going to be useful for everyone here. So the big risks we picked up in the current plans and examples of where urban digital twins have started to bleed into the African ecosystem is five key things: poor data quality and availability, weak governance frameworks, text resource and skills constraints, overdependence on external partners, and exclusion of vulnerable communities. And so what I'm really keen to do with you today as we go forward is not to say boo urban digital twins, but to say how can we create a model in this that takes us into account so the really cool work that you're doing maximize the impact, especially in the most vulnerable part of the world, because I think this might apply to more than just Africa, but this is just my context. So I'm not here to be a killjoy at all. I think the first thing is poor data quality and availability. And I mean, I put up again, this is probably 10 years ago that I put these cartoons up from Dilbert and XKCD, but I think that what we're kind of doing a little bit, especially in the context of urban digital twins, is building that again, where maybe that block is not is infrastructure based, but it's also data quality and accessibility and supply. And so, what we see a lot of is just cities. I think probably the most data advanced city in Africa is probably still 5 to 10 years away from having data that can fully support an urban digital twin in a way that safeguards, outcomes to a reasonable risk level. That's not to say we shouldn't be doing them and shouldn't be experiencing them and taking parts of them, but certainly that most of the environments we're experiencing have got very little full context for data availability and data quality. There are also weak governance frameworks. This is not just true to African contexts. But an article from 6 years ago about how the city of Johannesburg in South Africa outsourced all of its CCTV to private companies. So that's your facial images. And so something I will get onto is, I think technology is a problem. It is the problem, and it's one of the big problems. And I know we've been heard from digital transformation people for years that tech isn't the problem. That's because they're selling the tech, and we adopted a little bit too much. I know there's context to that, so we can talk after over a beer. But the point is to build certain layers of a UDT. Sounds like a disease. Like this kind of layer of data, I don't think I have to go into too much, and this is still the case, by the way. Like, there's still basically movements and facial recognition, facial data, biometric data that is locked up in private sector companies that the government would have to buy. They don't actually have a right to, and these sorts of things. And I think a big thing, I'll go to this, is that because of the tech resource and skill constraints, and obviously we can go into history, in order to meet outcomes of smart city goals, the only way to get there is to outsource, privatize, rely on the global north. If we want to get there in the timeframes that are acceptable to big development frameworks. And that means we're not concretizing the sand, we're just building on top of it. And so that's why private sector companies, not just Johannesburg, own that data. But the problem is that what we're doing there is we're creating a problem that's growing. The snowball is running, because when we come to want to use that information to create your urban digital twin and similar analysis and tools and evidence-based planning, all of a sudden our data is locked away. It's got to be paid for. We've used the skills we've used to even build the analytical environments or the infrastructure environments are all not sitting in the city themselves, as was said in the previous discussion. So I think there's a real interest in there. I took this picture in Fort Portal in Uganda, one of the new cities in Uganda we're working with. This was a World Bank biodigester project that ran for the 5 years that the World Bank funded it and then stopped. Crops, they grow a lot of tea there. It's right by where the gorillas are on the Ugandan western border. They don't need extra fertilization. No one needed to buy the outcome of this biodigester. So there was no UI, UX done in that project. But obviously, if the World Bank or someone else comes along and says to someone in Global South, hey, we're going to give you a bunch of money and technical assistance, they don't say no. And so this is now where the landfill is. The whole concept was apparently they were going to do biodigesting and sell fertilizer to farmers locally. No one needed it. And so that's not to say external parties are bad. It's to say that the model of engagement maybe needs to change. I'll get onto that. And then I did a case study, so we ourselves and many others have got involved in a lot of trying to understand how cities work from imagery from the top. Again, I don't think I need to go into the technical things, but obviously your LiDAR, your satellite imagery, all that kind of stuff to try and understand cities. And we did a bit of a self-assessment of why we were worried about this. And we came up to the fact that it really still, the design principles didn't really include anyone that we were trying to talk to. We can go into a lot of these, but our key things we came up was weaponization of visibility. So when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about the context of South African cities that have, and African cities that have a formal, informal divide or context. And until Black Panther came out and we saw Wakanda, our best ideas of cities were ones like this one. And we didn't really understand, we still don't seem to understand that informality is not a curse, and that there is actually probably a design of cities that needs to engage in formality, similar to how inclusive financial sectors have engaged mobile money, that will change the way we think about cities. And so a lot of vulnerable communities don't want to be visible. There is no consent in them being found when you use that data. We are at high risk of using, unless we go and find out, on the ground, we might see no logical pathway, but and build or plan for infrastructure that cuts off a community from a water source because it's not apparent from the data we're using. Because of this war on informality and the poor, and the urban design principles of master planning, we've all urban planning is kind of pushed, which is to say, here's a perfect looking city, and it doesn't have any of that messy stuff there. A lot of African cities are trying to and especially South Africa, and I'll say this mainly for our context, eradicate informality. So finding people means they're policed, and their homes are broken, and they're moved, and all this sort of stuff. And it was quite interesting. I mean, everyone knows the great example of AWS hiring in the States, where white men were being overly kind of moving through that algorithmic kind of job application process. But the data we have to feed ML and algorithmic planning is all formalized data based on many. So we're what I'm seeing a lot of in urban machine learning and AI is, again, we're repeating the problems of feeding it formal global north data and then making it work for informal global south cities. And pushing times to donor-driven metrics over community priorities. It's much better to be able to talk about, you will get flown to Hamburg to talk about your digital twin, not how you're going to spend the next 10 years trying to clean data out of an Oracle database or teach people how to collect data in the city of 30,000 people. I didn't get flown to flew myself, by the way, just saying. And so extractive development without benefit sharing. What is our plan for value exchange for taking people's data? Do they own their image, their home, what data do you think is personal data? So I think what we're doing a lot of is, an OCL's approach is to make sure we work in strategy and implementation at the same time. So it could be called a digital strategy, a data strategy, a policy-based environment. But basically, if you're working in a space where there isn't a long-term plan that can include safeguarding, include governance, include capacity building, as well as infrastructure and analysis, then you're not in a good place. And we talked about, there was a comment earlier about open source. I do believe everything should be open source, but whether you do or you don't, I think what you were saying was right, which is that the public has to hold the standards, government has to hold standards and ensure interoperability, so that no matter who plays in the environment, they have to be able to connect. And the terms of engagement are done on the behalf of the public sector and the public themselves. Talk about design for trust. Oh, I'm running out of time. And then service design. So starting with, I think if you read a lot of, I'm breathing into this mic a lot. I think if you talk about UX, UI in a urban space, I think service design really encapsulates it well, and I don't see a lot of it. So in other words, how do we design services and moving back from that? I think that's maybe the UI UX step that needs to come in. I think also we're going to realize, and this is probably true of many cities, is that everyone outsources their tech and their IT to the IT department in the city or the data department in the city, maybe an urban planning or economic development department in the city. What we're trying to do in cities is saying you need to make your city manager and every single head of department, who are essentially CEOs of their area of the city, very data and digital enabled. Capacity building is critical and can't be got around. And I think there are perverse incentives that we create in these projects that we together do as development community that cherry pick people inside cities that are maybe stuck and incentivize them on short-term thinking because they will get something out of it, but doesn't necessarily speak to the systemic problem. And then I think my goal here is not to say, don't come to Africa, don't come work with us. My goal here is to say, like, the way we can build more sustainable long-term investment and like achieve common goals is to maybe change the nature of engagement a little bit from the current development model. I think designing for trust is critical. So to talk to that case study we did on how, and analyzing city just from its data, these are kind of some of the principles we came at. You have to co-design with communities, have to implement the data governance frameworks from the start, and establish your rights to consent, access, and redress for communities. The strategy is critical. You got to pair data with non-data, or not, it's not non-data, qualitative, so ethnographic, participatory mapping, those sorts of things. Understand that, like, we're repeating the same mistakes, I think, in the urban space with AI and ML, and how to make sure we know what's feeding our models. Return what you get. I don't think anything developed with public sector funding should be able to be locked down or shouldn't be given to back to the public, and they should own their own data and build local ownership. Really awesome article the other day. There's no chance I can do this in 2 minutes, but anyway, the future for me also is platform cities. So smart cities are a bit of a lie. They're typically a SAP, Oracle, Microsoft ERP that runs the whole city, but really accounts for 20% of it. That's this article. And then all the things cities really do have to try to fit into that. And so what are platform cities? So, and I believe urban digital twins won't work without platform cities. So if you think about government as a platform, Tim O'Reilly, Richard Pope, back in 2010, it's designing service around citizens and around APIs, but really just changing the space to see the digital infrastructure as public, like we do with our roads and our train stations and our everything else. And so a lot of the themes that were coming up from today, actually, and maybe I was just thinking about them because they're part relevant to me, is this move into digital public infrastructure and our move into platform cities is to say what I said earlier, that we control the framework. We control like the API standards and specs. We control the analytical toolkits and guidelines on code and all those sorts of things. And then the private sector can come play as much as they like. But they can't hold people's faces in their private data sets. They can't decide what the standards of those data are. I think I'm at time, but anyway, so platform city foundations. Just wanted to like kind of mention this idea of digital public infrastructure and how it applies to cities and urban digital twins. So look at the work of IIPP at UCL, David Eves, the Eurostack that Francesco Bria's been writing about. There's a lot of reasons why, as cities, we have to claim back the digital infrastructure and make it public, and go further than that and allow data to be owned by the person themselves. But not more so that every time I come to an urban planning thing, we still reflect government as a supply side in the way we organize it. So there's a transport department, and there's a energy department, and there's a water department. And if we redesigned government today, we wouldn't do that. We would design it around how services work for citizens. I'm part of the team that's working with South African presidency to implement the digital transformation in South Africa over the next 5 years, and digital services unit that's doing it. So what's interesting for me is, how does an urban digital twin, how do we create environments that make that awesome so that an urban digital twin can provide insight for that? And how do we look at the life cycle? This is our use case in South Africa, across something like how water, transport, health, whatever matter for like family health or the actual things that people do. And just to say to everyone, obviously there's massive things happening in the world over the last 10 years with, and for cities in terms of identity, data exchange and payments. We're busy building a data exchange across South Africa. And that sort of thing is also starting to entrench the digital infrastructure into the public sector. Finally, so Open Cities Lab has set up across Africa cities collaboration called Mijibora, which means better cities in Swahili. I didn't name it, Ambola did. So our plan is to impact 100 cities in 15 countries with 200 million beneficiaries by 2030. We want to do it together. We want to you can find things like responsible tech toolkits, data strategy toolkits, ability to access support there. We've already got great collaborations in the room, but we'd like all of your thinking on there. I would like to give all of those 100 cities access to all of the amazing minds in the room and work together for the continent that I think will change the future. And, oh, the slide. So let's make digital twins work for the visible city. As I said, I'm not that hungry. Obviously, my biggest point today in the learning around engaging with urban digital twins as someone that isn't necessarily a for or against, but more find them in my work and work in them is they have to integrate. Tech is the problem. We've got to move away from private outsourced or private sector digital infrastructure and data. And we have to form a new way of engagement, create platform cities and digital public infrastructure. We need to think about our model of how we engage and understand. I don't know what low leadership is, but we have to engage with how to create strategy and support institutionalization of what we're doing. And I think that will actually foster longer term, larger investment than our current development funding model and foster the local data culture. And then collaborate with me, us. Thanks.